Mixtures are the type of matter which is formed by the combination of more than one substances, and those substances that combine together to form these mixtures are referred to as components. Now consider the fruit salad and the sugar solution. Both of them are examples of mixtures, right? In the case of fruit salad, it is an example of a mixture existing in solid phase, whereas sugar solution is an example of mixture existing in liquid phase. The mixtures not only exist in solid or the liquid phase, but also they will exist in the gaseous forms also. The very typical example for the mixtures existing in gaseous phase is the air around us. You know, each and every living beings are able to live because we are able to inhale certain amount of oxygen, right? So it is very clear that the air has oxygen in it. Also, we could exhale a certain amount of carbon dioxide also. Okay, so it is very clear that this air consists of oxygen as well as carbon dioxide. Not only oxygen and carbon dioxide, air has various other components which are water vapor, argon and nitrogen. Okay, now you may have a confusion that since all the living beings are exhaling oxygen, it must be the most abundant in air. But that is not at all right. Actually, the most abundant gas present in the air is nitrogen, and it constitutes about 78% of the total air. The oxygen help us in the combustion of certain materials. We are able to burn certain things in our surroundings or our environment is because of the presence of this oxygen. If oxygen was absent, the burning will not be proceeded. Okay. Now in the case of water vapor, as an evidence for the presence of water vapor in the air, as you can see, if a warm breeze or a warm air hit a cold surface, what will happen? Tiny droplets of water are seen to be occurring on that surfaces, right? Those tiny water droplets are because of the presence of water vapor present in the air. So in total, air is actually a gaseous mixture which has these components in it. Okay, now let us perform an experiment. Consider I have taken calcium oxide. Calcium oxide is nothing but a typical chemical. It is commonly referred to as quicklime. And I have mixed this calcium oxide with water. I will get another chemical that is referred to as calcium hydroxide, and is commonly referred to as lime water. Okay, now I am keeping this calcium hydroxide that does not have any particular color initially, but if we place this calcium hydroxide in the air for some time, we may observe that it will turn milky white in color. This milky white color must be because of the formation of yet another chemical, right? So, this calcium hydroxide has converted into calcium carbonate. Okay, the one thing that the calcium hydroxide will react to give calcium carbonate is nothing but carbon dioxide. So, this experiment is actually a solid evidence to prove that carbon dioxide is a component of air. Okay. Now, based on the existence of these components on different phases or different states, we could say that different types of mixtures are existing. The very first example is air. As I have already mentioned, air is actually a combination of different types of gases, right? It consists of argon, nitrogen, oxygen, right? All of them are gases. So, this air is actually an example of gas and gas mixture, and it is uniform. Okay, now next example is energy drinks. You know, the energy drinks you drink is actually carbon dioxide dissolved in water. Okay, that's how we are getting these energy drinks. Okay, the drink which is formed by the dissolution of carbon dioxide in water is commonly referred to as aerated drink, aerated water. Okay, this carbon dioxide is gas phase and we are dissolving it in water, which is a liquid phase. So, this aerated drink is actually an example of gas and liquid mixture. There is also another example, that is oxygen in water. You know, the aquatic life is able to sustain because the water bodies consist of certain amount of oxygen, right? They also require certain amount of oxygen to sustain their life. So oxygen is definitely dissolved in those water bodies. So oxygen is a gas, water is a liquid. So oxygen in water is also an example of gas and liquid. And these two are uniform in nature. Okay, the next example is dust particles in the air. The air also consists of certain amount of dust particles in it. Okay, suppose you have placed a dark colored chart paper, like a black colored chart paper in your window, and you are leaving it for some time. If you observe that chart paper after some time, you may observe that certain particles, certain materials are getting embedded on that particular chart paper. That is nothing but the dust particles, and those dust particles are coming from the air around us. So, dust particles is actually solid material, air is gaseous material. So, dust particles in air is an example of solid and gas mixture. Not only dust particle, suppose carbon particles in air is also an example of solid and gas mixture. And this is non-uniform in nature. You could see those dust particles with your naked eye, right? So, we could say that this solid particles in air is a non-uniform mixture. Now, consider oil and water. Oil is a liquid, water is also a liquid. So, obviously, oil and water is an example of liquid and liquid mixture. Also, consider the case of vinegar. Vinegar is actually acetic acid dissolved in water. Both of them are existing in liquid phase. So, this is also an example of liquid and liquid mixture. And oil and water is non-uniform in nature, whereas vinegar is uniform in nature. Now, consider sand and water. Sand is a solid particle, water is a liquid particle. So, obviously, this is solid and liquid mixture. Seawater is actually the water mixed with NaCl or salt, right? So, it is also an example of solid and liquid mixture. And this sand and water is an example of non-uniform mixture, whereas seawater is an example of uniform mixture. Now consider baking powder. Baking powder is actually a mixture of baking soda plus tartaric acid. Here baking soda is a solid. Tartaric acid is also existing in solid form. So baking powder is an example of solid and solid mixture. Not only baking powder, alloys are also an example of this solid and solid mixture, and both of them are uniform in nature.